Hi there, I've come across a request from one of my dear viewers to render the likeness of Tim the Peasant. That's it, no fluff, nothing special, just straight to the point, which I'll love to get into in just a second. If you haven't seen my content before, this series is a world building project for a fantasy world ruled by goblins. It's created by names that viewers leave in the comment section of my videos. From those names, I create a character design as well as some lore around the character, usually in the form of a few paragraphs or of a story, tying them all into the same universe. For several years now, I've been building this world on TikTok, but recently I've started making long-form content on YouTube. In order to help me get my footing on here, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or maybe even comment a name for another character for a video. To start out with this design, I wanted to keep this guy pretty simple, as the name suggests. I don't want too many bells and whistles, but I also don't want this design to be boring, which is definitely an interesting line to tread. This means I will be relying heavily on face design and silhouette design to bring visual interest to this fella. In this initial stage, you can see me playing with a bunch of different face designs, just trying to find one that fits the character. After going through quite a few options and ideas, I went through some of my old drawings and found one from several months back named Farmer Jeldt, which I never quite finished. I'd started it with the idea in mind that I would somehow use it for content, but I never got around to fleshing it out more than that. I thought he looked pretty fun, and I loved the name Jeldt, so I figured I could reuse it and have it as Tim's surname. As far as I know, in the medieval era, which this world is relatively analogous to, peasants didn't traditionally have surnames, although I figured it would be alright to have this slight historical inaccuracy in a world of goblins and magic and monsters. For this piece, I also decided to expand on this guy's design as a whole, fleshing out his outfit beyond just a vague silhouette. I do still like this idea, keeping his body obscured in this way, although for the purpose of a full video design, I felt it was a little bit underwhelming. For the outfit design itself, I took a lot of inspiration from medieval fashion, particularly in the headwear of Tim here. I ended up giving him a type of hood quite common in the medieval era called a chaperon, which is identifiable by this long tail that comes out the back called a liripipe. Around the year 1300, however, it became particularly fashionable to wear the chaperon backwards, wearing the face hole on top of your head and wrapping the rest of the hood around it like a hat. It's quite an interesting style and one that I'll almost definitely use in a future design. For this piece, even though it's not entirely traditional, I also still kept this tall straw hat as part of the design, just because I thought it was fun. Around this point in the process, even though I do like how this dude is looking so far, I know it needs more visual interest, so I decided to give him a whole crowd of suns. As I was working on this part, it gave me some great ideas on how to proceed with the lore for this guy. One farmer with a whole lot of children in a village means that he'll be economically dominant over other households, having more labor at hand than other families, as well as militarily dominant if it comes to that, which I thought lent an interesting air to the concept of the humble peasant farmer. As I'm drawing these fellas, I'm taking care to make sure each one is quite unique compared to his brothers, with each clearly having their own personalities and sense of style. During this process, I also thought it would be fun to name each one of them, which went as follows. Starting off, this little guy at the bottom is named Bunty. The guy next to him with the big mustache and balding head is named Basil. The guy to his left wearing the hood with the sunken eyes is Vernon. The guy to his left with the long hair is named Miltum. The big blue fella with the pitchfork here is Fellard. The skeevy looking guy on the far left is Turgis. And the lad with the middle part and the dancing shoes is good old Greg. When it comes to equipment for this happy little family, again, the name of the game is modesty. In the process for coming up with each of these characters, I wanted them to be wearing clothing and holding weapons that would be entirely reasonable for medieval peasantry to own. Several of the boys here are seen wearing these light-colored coverings that look almost like undergarments. This is because they are based on historical undergarments called brays. People in the Middle Ages would wear these articles under other pieces of clothing, such as hose, but would often remove these outer garments during hard labor or hot weather, leaving just the brays on. Now, of course, most historical examples you see of brays are much longer and baggier than the ones you see here, but that's just because I thought it was funny to exaggerate the image of a bunch of fellows running around in their underwear. As for weaponry, everything shown is essentially just a repurposed farm tool, or something that could easily be handmade. Through this, I wanted to really hammer home the idea that even though this group could act as a makeshift militia, they really are makeshift. Lastly, as the head of the family, Tim has the most expensive kit, with only somewhat weathered clothing and the largest weapon, which in reality is just a rusty old scythe. In comparison to some of the knights and monarchs I've drawn before, perhaps not the most inspiring leader, but for these loyal lads, I'm sure their paw is just as good, if not better. And with that, we just need to finish shading in the background, and from there, all that we have left is the story of these boys and their father. Timmond Jeldt and his 7 beautiful sons. Though the line of Tim is humble, it stretches far back into the days before Gobs learned to hammer iron out of stone, before histories were scratched into the bark of trees. The Jeldts were among the first to settle and tame the region, cutting soil and clearing land, stacking stone into a modest hut which remains standing all these centuries later. In the long years since, the Jeldts have worked this land, not a one of them venturing a day's travel on foot from the place where they were born, out behind the hut next to the woodshed so as not to dirty the house with fluids and gunk. As generations passed, a village was built up around them, never harboring more than 50 souls at a time, the ever-sizable Jeldt household included. In the crisis following the dethroning of the Tyrant King Zurkroid, captains and commanders in the service of the Great Hambone were granted great tracts of land by the new administration. The village wherein the Jeldts resided, up to this point nameless and autonomous, was granted both a name and a liege lord. The new name, Beltch-on-Mud, was derived from the fact that the village was located on a lesser tributary of the Great Mud River, and by the surname of the upjumped lord who now controlled the lands many miles around, Kuntholious Beltch. Once a somewhat respected captain, whose greatest achievement in the rebellion was his ability to bow the lowest to his superiors and scream their accolades the loudest, he proved to be a less than inspiring authority for the village. Baron Beltch remained high up in his small tower, scarcely deigning to descend to the bottom floor. A reasonable precaution, to be fair, as the area floods quite often and the Mud River is aptly named. Still, though, he remained in his luxurious room, sending forth tax bill after tax bill upon his serfs. Beltch-on-Mud was never a prosperous village, often just being able to make it through winter. Perhaps the odd harvest would do well, and some brave gob would be selected to travel to the next town over to sell the collected goods at market. These taxes chafed quite badly, however, with little granted in return. To solve their newfound issues, one night all the villagers met at the Jeldt household. Because they were the first family to live here, the Jeldts in years past had always taken a role of leadership in the town, and Tim Jeldt was no exception. A keen mind, Tim knew that something must be done. He and his 7 strong boys all armed themselves with whatever tools they could find, and the next morning marched on Baron Beltch's wide little tower. The small regiment of guards that Beltch had in service were still dressed in nightgowns and their unders when the Jeldts flooded in. They tossed Baron Beltch out into the muck, sleep still blurring his vision, and took control of the tower. Standing at the top of the crenellations, looking over the village, Tim felt something stirring in his heart. Ambition. His eyes found the horizon, tracing it. Looking past hedgerow and marsh, he saw the silhouettes of far fields and huts. Thinking to himself that moment, he found he was quite unsatisfied with the humble title of Tim the Peasant. Tim the Lord, however, now that would fit him much better.